Good afternoon, everyone. It being 4 o'clock, I'd invite you to take your seats so we can get started. Okay, we'll start with confirmation of the minutes from May 27th, minutes number 7, and from June 6th, minutes number 8. Carried? Declarations of interest? Seeing none. Committee meetings, reports from committee chairs. Do you want to do that before we do the consent agenda or come back to it? Do it now, they're quick? Sure. Okay. Policy and governance, Member Valiquette.
Thank you, Madame la Présidente. So the Policy and Governance Committee met on June the 6th, and we discussed the board's 2019-2020 draft strategic plan and provided further input. The updated copy is before the board for final approval this evening. I just wanted to mention one point that came up in our discussions, and it was in regards to defining what is community policing. And we had a discussion during that meeting that we really do want to meet the community's expectations, and we want to make sure that our definition reflects what the community is expecting from us. So I just wanted to add that. OPS staff will be making a presentation on the key priority areas for the next 18 months in regards to the plan. 2 other items came up as well for discussion: hate crimes, as well as the use of technology by the service and privacy implications. The committee made requests to see the services policies pertaining to these areas for future discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Valiquette. Finance and Audit Committee, Member Smallwood.
Yes, Finance and Audit Committee met on June the 10th. We had preliminary discussions about the 2020 budget. We also received a presentation on back office transformations. This was an item the board had requested to receive an update on back in February as part of our budget discussions. We anticipate receiving a further update on this item in September, and that's it for my report.
Thank you very much, Member Smallwood. And then the Human Resources Committee. I'm the chair of that one, so I have a short report. The Human Resources Committee met on June 17th to discuss the chief and CAO recruitment process. On behalf of the committee and board, I'm happy to announce that the postings for both positions are up on the Odgers-Bernston website effective today. Interested candidates are now welcome to apply. They can begin submitting their applications. Our community consultation closed on June 7th. We received a lot of valuable feedback through our town hall and survey. We have incorporated the feedback into the job posting. We are also going to use it as part of our selection process going forward. We are accepting applications until July 19th, and we anticipate holding interviews in August. We are targeting to have both positions filled this fall. And that's mine. So are there any questions on any of the committee reports? Seeing none, received on all of those? Received. Thank you. Inquiries? No. Okay, so we're going to go through consent agenda. We'll hold some of the items, and then we'll return to them. So, Chief's verbal report. There is a verbal presentation, so we'll hold that and return to it. Item number 2, background check fee structure. There's a presentation and there are delegations, so we're going to hold that and return to it. Item number 3, strategic direction for the Ottawa Police Service 2019 to 2020. There's a PowerPoint, so we'll hold that. Item number 4, Ottawa Police Service 2018 Annual Report. There's also a PowerPoint, so we'll be holding that. And item number 5, South Facility Phase A1 Site Plan, also a presentation, so we're going to hold that. Item number 6, Professional Standards Section 2018 Annual Report. Can we receive that one? Received. Item number 7, Modernization Roadmap Program Update. Received? Received. Item number 8, interoperable mobile communications managed service. Received. Item number 9, report on the SIU investigation. Received. Item number 10, outstanding board inquiries and motions, June 2019.
I had something I would like to just quick.
Member Smallwood?
One of the outstanding motions is that with respect to the collection of identifying information, and I'd suggested that this Justice Tulloch's report and recommendation be referred to the Policy and Governance Committee for review and discussion. Now thinking maybe it would be better if it's acceptable to Deputy Jaswal that we direct it to him and he can put it as part of his EDI report and then come back to us once he comes with the EDI report.
So this is a motion to refer?
That's right. That this be referred, instead of referring it to the Policy and Governance, it will refer it to Deputy Jaswal.
No,
That's fine?
no issues at all.
Okay, so motion to refer, carried? Okay, carried. Item number 11, letters of...
You received a response to one of your inquiries.
Also on item number 10. Okay, so we did receive a response to one of our inquiries. It's been circulated? Okay, so we take that one off, or?
Yeah.
So that one's received?
Yeah.
Okay, and then received on the report. Okay. Item number 11, letters of commendation received? Okay. And then the in-camera items, I wanted to add one in-camera agenda item. It's item number 4, major event briefing. So that will be added to our in-camera agenda. So returning then to our held items, we'll start with item number 1, the Chief's verbal report. Chief Bell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will try and be brief tonight as I know we have many issues that we are discussing. First, I'd like to thank all the board members and the senior officers that attended the 2019 badge ceremony. It's a big day for us. It's a great celebration. We had 88 officers who we had the opportunity to swear in, to present their badges and celebrate with their families at that great event. Over 700 people attended. So again, thank you for coming because it is a very big day for us. As the Madam Chair indicated, we're finalizing our operational planning around Canada Day. We are working hard with our partners, as we have over the last couple months, to make sure that the thousands of people that attend downtown have the ability to arrive and go home safely. We'll be providing you an operational briefing tonight at our in-camera session. I'd like to thank Deputy Chief Jaswal and the Diversity and Race Relations section for the planning that they did around the Interfaith Safety Forum that occurred the week before last. As you know, it was in response to concerns that we'd heard from the community around the safety of religious institutions in our city. It was great to have so many people out there, and it was a really good opportunity for the interfaith community to have a dialogue, start to network, get some information about some best practices, as well as see the resources that we offer within the Ottawa Police Service. I think it was a positive step forward. It was a very good dialogue, and I hope it's a conversation that we can support and continue moving ahead. You may have read from some of the press releases we've put out lately that we continue our market initiative. So over the last number of weekends, we've conducted community safety initiatives in the market. And what that is an opportunity to have a more visible, accessible presence within that area of a number of police officers. As part of these initiatives, we conduct bar checks. We do enforcement of all sorts of laws in the area and deal with social disorder issues that we know happen on nice weekends in that area. We're receiving very good feedback from the community, and as of right now, it's our plan to continue these market initiatives through the rest of the summer. I think it's also important when we come together to take the opportunity to provide you with some of the good news stories about the great work that our members do on a daily basis. So I have 2 of them for you tonight. And the first one is around a missing persons investigation. You may or may not know we do over 2,000 missing persons calls per year, and each one is unique as we go to deal with it. The 11th of June this year, a couple weeks ago, Constable Keith Martin was called to respond to a call for a missing elderly male. Took all the steps necessary, contacted the OPP, talked with other agencies, OC Transpo. We have a triage list that we go through, as well as contact the bank for any suspicious card activity on the male's account. The next day, Constable Martin received a call that the male was using a bank card in Canada. So he advised the comm center, and a number of officers responded to the area. We also put out a media advisory on the car that the elderly male was driving. A citizen ultimately observed the vehicle, and we then had a number of officers flood the area where we were able to locate the male. It turns out the male was disoriented and had been driving around for 26 hours, thinking that he had returned home at some point to go to sleep. So thankfully for the work of Constable Martin and all of the other officers involved, they were able to get to this man, help him, but also keep the rest of our community safe. We know that through conversations and letters that we've received from the family, they were very pleased with the outcome and very grateful to the officer for the work that he started. The last piece I want to tell you about is an incident that occurred at the airport just a couple weeks ago. A man arrived who would be best described as down on his luck, recently laid off, was looking to go to have a new start in a new city, and part of his trip had him lay over in Ottawa for a number of days. So he went to a local shelter, but then ultimately returned to the airport to try and get on his flight to carry on to Calgary. Based on the condition of the male, he was unable to get on his flight. He was disheveled, unclean, wasn't accepted by the carrier. So what the officers became engaged because they got called because it was a male in the airport, and they went down and they were able to locate him a set of clothing, get him a place to shower and clean up, and ultimately helped get him onto the next flight so the male could continue his journey on to Calgary. I think both these are great examples of the good work that the women and men do every single day in this organization, and I think it's important that you hear them and that we have the opportunity to publicly speak about them. So that's my verbal report for tonight.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Any questions? Oh, okay, we'll start with Member Blaustein.
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge, we got an email this morning, we at the board, about Deborah Arnaud's group working to facilitate new positions. She's the executive advisor of the Office of Respect, Conduct and Values, and she's been working for a very long time with Staff Sergeant Peter Dunluck and Steve Boucher to integrate some new protocols in the service. And we were officially informed today, and I'm very proud, and I'd like to officially congratulate Service Sergeant Major Peter Dunluck and Ceremonial Sergeant Major Steve Boucher for their new official titles, their new roles that they've been doing for a long time anyway, and Deborah Arnaud for the hard work that she's been doing. And I just want to congratulate them and officially acknowledge the great things that they are doing, that they have been doing, and that they're going to continue to do with OPS.
So thank you very much for that. We're very excited to have them come in. It's a pilot project that we're going to run for till at least the end of the year to evaluate how well it works. These positions are actually designed to create a better conduit between many of our frontline members from staff sergeant down, and the executive team and senior officer level. So both of them, Staff Sergeant Daniluk and Staff Sergeant Boucher, have come in very quickly and started to do lots of work in order to give us ideas and opportunities where we can have better communication and exposure with our frontline officers. So thank you very much for recognizing them. We're very excited about having them on board and are very eager to see how effective they can be moving ahead.
Okay, thank you, Member Blaustein. Member Nerman.
Thank you, Chair Deans. First of all, thanks to the OPS for organizing the Interfaith Community Summit. It was really exciting to meet different community leaders from different faiths. I have a question for you. You have listened to their needs, how their needs will be fitting into the new deployment model.
So I'll turn it over to, I was just going to say, I'll turn it over to Deputy Chief Jaswell, and he can speak to that.
Thank you for the question. So certainly as a product of that forum, that one day, we're preparing a report on the things that we've heard, but I think they spoke strongly around our response to hate crime and how we are supporting faith institutions, faith communities around the issue of hate crime. So that's going to be incorporated into the plan going forward in terms of our review that we're doing. Basically, we are retooling the hate crime response to make sure that it's more substantive and meets the needs of those communities. So there will be a report back through the Community Equity Council, and we are happy to bring it back to the board as well in terms of some of the changes that we're making to that response to make sure that we continue to evolve that process.
Can the regular feedback be given to the board? Because there may be, needs may be changing according to the situation. So, of course, you will be putting them into the deployment model, which we have suggested, but if on a regular basis, the board is kept informed about that.
Certainly, and I leave it to the chair to, however you want to receive that information, whether it's through the board proper, P&G committee, however you would like to receive that, we're happy to provide it.
So if I can suggest, I think we're already bringing back some policy work around our response to hate incidents and hate crimes. So maybe through the Policy and Governance Committee. So that might be a good way to actually forward this information as well.
Okay, that's fine, whichever is convenient. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Member Nerman. Member Smallwood.
Thank you. Just as a result of an incident recently, it brought to my mind a question that, something I wasn't really familiar with, and that is with respect to private property, the event that occurred. And as I guess I'm understanding it now, if a member of the public is on private property and they're doing an activity which, and I think this is really important in light of the growth of private security, and we're seeing more and more of this private security, that if in the eyes of that hired security official, they believe the person is doing an improper act, they have the authority to stop the person, demand identification from them, and if that person fails to give identification, they can then arrest them and detain them. Is that the case?
Yes, so the Trespass to Property Act has a governing act, the Provincial Offences Act, that lays out exactly when and how anybody engaged in those provincial offences, in the enforcement of those provincial offences, can stop, detain anybody. So as you indicated, a failure to identify is actually one of those areas that if you don't identify as someone who's responsible for a private property, whether it's a homeowner or a security company, you can in fact be detained and arrested, and then at that point, that's when the police become engaged.
Just so I'm clear, you said provincial offenses, but the initial stop could have occurred not because of a provincial offense, just because of a prohibited action that the property owner had said, for instance, don't do this. And that would be sufficient cause then to stop, detain somebody and seek identification from them. Is that correct?
So the Provincial Offences Act is an administrative act that actually lays out the conditions under which somebody can arrest. The actual activities, whether it's the Highway Traffic Act, the Liquor License Act, or the Trespass to Property Act, as I think you're speaking about today, further lays out what would those prohibited activities be. So those activities would then be included within the act that is being contravened.
If a property owner posts something and says, you shall not do this, it may not be a provincial offense, but it may be something they don't want people doing. But that would be the reason why the security guard would then stop the person and then demand identification, and then failure to identify would lead to arrest and detainment.
So if it's a prohibited activity as is what is allowed under the act, then yes, you're absolutely right. So whatever the prohibited activity is, because it's private property that we're speaking about, that's where the Trespass to Property Act is enforceable. Whatever the owner of that property deems to be prohibited, as long as there's proper signage and proper notification to people, then yes, they can detain someone.
Okay, thank you, Member Smallwood. Any other questions, comments received on the Chief's verbal report? Received. Okay, item number 2, background check fee structure. Yes, presentation, are you doing it? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I start, I'd just like to introduce Charlene Clark, our Manager of Records Management Section, as well as Rob Lefebvre, the Supervisor of the Records Management Section, are joining me here at the front table today. So thank you very much. I will start the presentation by walking through some of the background on this issue. Back in 2017, the board approved a full cost recovery approach for background check fees. This enabled the OPS to meet its $2 million efficiency targets in 2017 and 2018. The online background check system was launched in 2017 after significant investment. It's the first online service in Canada that offers full electronic end-to-end processing in 24 to 48 hours. The system has allowed OPS to deal with the significant growth in volumes and has addressed the large backlog that existed prior. The board approved the current fee structure, $90 for employment and $0 for volunteers, in October of 2018. The average cost of the service was determined at $65. Several options were presented to comply with the full cost recovery model. Those rates went into effect January 1st, 2019, and resolved a $2.4 million budget deficit. As part of the 2019 budget process, the board reduced revenues by $400,000 and directed OPS staff to report back to the board with options for adjustments to the fees for background checks, taking into account the need to fairly distribute the cost of the service amongst users. The options were tabled at the May board meeting. Today, the report is presented for approval, along with the results of the public consultation. This slide shows the fee structure for background checks from police services across Ontario. As you can see from the slide, OPS has the highest fee for employment in Ontario and is the only service that we are aware of not charging for volunteers. The average fee for employment is $50, and the average fee for volunteers is $20 across the province. In developing the fee options, staff created a set of principles to guide us. These principles are: treat all categories equitably, maintain efficient administrative processes, avoiding multi-tier pricing models and manual validation processes. And this is important to maintain an efficient service delivery model, to keep costs down, and to meet service levels. And finally, minimizing cross-segment subsidization. The fee structure options are presented as follows. Option A was status quo. This left employment fees at $90 and volunteer fees at $0. Option B was a partial cost recovery model. The $400,000 revenue provision was applied fully to reduce the cost for employment, which reduced the employment fees to $75. Volunteer fees remained $0. And option C was a partial cost recovery option also. The employment fees were reduced to $65, which is the average cost of the service. Volunteer fees are phased in at $10 for the remainder of 2019, increasing to $20 on January 1st, 2020. Now I will move on to the public consultation. The fee structure questionnaire was conducted online and was promoted via OPS social media and traditional media. It was posted from June 5th to June 17th. This was an open link questionnaire, therefore not a representative sample. The response was significant. Almost 3,100 responses were received, which was in line with the public consultation numbers that were received back in October of 2018. 64% of the respondents were volunteers. In terms of the results, 26% of the respondents selected option A as their preferred choice. Option A is the status quo option. 51% selected option B as their preferred choice. This was the $75 fee for employment and $0 for volunteer. And 23% selected option C, $65 for employment with a $20 volunteer fee phased in at $10 for 2019. Respondents were also encouraged to submit open-ended comments, a summary of which is included in the report. This questionnaire was extremely helpful. It is clear that background checks are very important to our community. We understand the concern of the volunteer community, and we take that very seriously. Many of us here are volunteers. We also heard from the employment sector and the impact of the $90 fee on them. Another factor, OPS is also facing significant financial pressures. The staff recommendation of option C attempts to balance all interests. Employment fees are reduced to $65, the average cost of the service. Okay, flip. Employment fees are reduced to $65, the average cost of the service. We've done our very best to minimize the impact on volunteers by phasing in the fee at $10 in 2019, increasing to $20 in 2020, which is the average fee charged by other police services across Ontario. And the recommendation ensures the financial sustainability for OPS. The recommendation achieves the $400,000 revenue reduction per the budget motion, minimizes customer subsidization, it phases in the volunteer fee, and it maintains efficiency of administrative processing. So moving forward, the next steps would include implementation of the rate changes to be effective September 1st, 2019. Thank you, Madam Chair. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Letourneau. I'm sure there's going to be questions, but there are a number of public delegations, so I'm going to call them first. We'll hear from the public delegations, and then we'll go to questions and comments. So our first presenter tonight is Marie Eveline from Volunteer Ottawa, and Marie Eveline will be followed by Guillermo Alverdo from the Gloucester Dragons Soccer Club. Good afternoon. You have 5 minutes to address the board. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again for the opportunity to address the board with regard to the issue of background checks for volunteers. As I've indicated in the past, the issue is a very significant one for our members, and based on the results of the survey from last year as well as this year, the members are quite keen to ensure that we do not have fees for background checks for volunteers. We also recognize that it's a complex issue. Because of the changes to the fee structure which were implemented in January of 2019, a significant number of not-for-profit organizations were impacted with regard to the costs for employees as well for background checks, especially those earning minimum wage. And as a result, what we've been trying to do is balance out the needs of not-for-profits who have employees with those who have a lot of volunteers. And that is why Volunteer Ottawa supports option B. What it does is it ensures that volunteers are not deterred from volunteering by having to pay a fee, but it also reduces the impact of the original $90 fee, which was implemented in January of 2019. So we feel that option B is the best compromise between all the options put forward. I was quite surprised when I read the results of the survey, which indicated that 77% of the respondents did not support a fee for volunteers. But despite that, the recommendation is still that there be a fee for volunteers. So I was sort of questioned why we had a consultation process when the results of the consultation process were not taken into account in the recommendation. There's no question that charging a fee for police record checks will have an impact on volunteers and could prevent organizations from recruiting volunteers and securing volunteers, especially at a time when there's a lot of downloading from the province to the municipalities, when there's reduced revenues for a number of organizations in terms of providing services to those who are most vulnerable. The reliance on volunteers is only going to increase, and any deterrent that is put in place which will impact on the recruitment of volunteers should not be considered in our city. It's been argued that the fee is not very high. It's only $10 and then it's $20 starting in the new year, but it must be recognized that volunteers, many of whom volunteer at more than one organization, would have to pay multiple fees. And this is due to the result that we can't share the information due to privacy concerns. A lot of insurance provisions that not-for-profit organizations have clauses related to how often police record checks have to be undertaken. Checks are usually for specific positions within organizations as opposed to just a general volunteer position, so therefore there might have to be more than one record check. And for vulnerable record checks, RCMP policy stipulates that record checks must be completed for each agency that the applicant is volunteering for. So a $20 fee could be much more than a $20 fee for a volunteer who serves at more than one organization. So we really encourage that the Police Services Board, when they're looking at this issue, not support the recommendation that be option C, but instead continue to support volunteers and encourage volunteers and ensure that there's no barriers put in place that would deter individuals from volunteering in our community, a community that is known and recognized as being one of the most volunteering communities in the city, in the country. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Ms. Eveline. Are there any questions for the presenter? Seeing none, we'll go to our next delegation. It's Guillermo Alvarado. Sorry, I think I didn't say that very well.
I've been called a lot worse. Good afternoon, and thank you for letting me speak today. My name is Guillermo Alvarado. I am the volunteer director of operations for a small soccer club in Orleans. We represent 1,600 players, ages 4 to 18, both boys and girls. We rely exclusively on volunteers. Our association facilitates soccer all summer, and without volunteers, we do not exist. We beg and plead for volunteers. Even at the beginning of the season, we are short on coaches and assistant coaches. We currently have over 200 volunteers that facilitate soccer for our 1,600 players this year. We feel that the fees would limit the number of people that would be available for our association, especially finding volunteers. It is the most difficult thing that we do every year. So with that, we would like to keep the fees at zero if possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll move to our next speaker, Carrie Hartwick, a community volunteer, and Carrie will be followed by Tong, Chow, and Sari.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carrie, and I want you to know that I've been volunteering at Tantotown Community Health Center in various roles. During this time, while I've been volunteering, I was able to take a community leadership program, take part in a host and meet with local candidates in the federal election, and was recently asked to take part in a social prescribing health program. In this program, I have opportunities to offer group activities to the residents of Centertown. When I first started volunteering, my self-esteem was low, and I had trouble being with people I did not know. With the support of staff and volunteers, I have gained confidence in my skills and the abilities over the years that I am now looking for part-time work. Volunteering, not just for myself, can play a huge role in decreasing isolation and increasing socialization amongst many volunteers. Many of us are on low income, and paying for a police check takes a bite out of our tight budget. Some of us also volunteer for other organizations, and to pay for background checks more than once makes choosing to volunteer very difficult. Many organizations rely on volunteers to help run their programs successfully. We as volunteers make a huge commitment to our communities. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, we'll continue with Tom.
Good afternoon, Chair Deans and member of Ottawa Police Services Board. On behalf of the Coalition of Community Health and Resource Centers of Ottawa, we thank you for your time to allow us the opportunity to speak to you. And the 13 community health and resource centers offer a full range of community services delivered by a diverse team of professionals to residents across Ottawa. We recognize the importance of responding to the diverse and complex needs within local communities and pay particular attention to those community members who are most vulnerable and facing barriers for health and community involvement. Volunteers are one of Ottawa's most valuable assets. We encourage you to approve option B, partial cost recovery volunteer pay $0. Your report states under option B, the $400,000 set out in the 2019 budget will be applied to reduce the cost of background checks for employment. Volunteer checks would continue to remain free, and the full cost of background check service is borne by those seeking employment who would pay $75. This option meets the $400,000 revenue consideration approved by the board. The report says Ottawa is the only major city that waives a background check fee for volunteers, a testament to the value it sees in volunteering by reducing barriers to participation, a position it should maintain. By choosing option B, you will not only continue to ensure community participation by the most vulnerable, Ottawa will continue to demonstrate their value and commitment to volunteers. In your 2018 survey, 69% of respondents did not think volunteers should pay a portion of the background check service. And in your June survey, 77%, even more respondents, echoed the no fee option A or B. The community clearly demonstrated the importance of volunteerism and supported a $0 fee. Charging volunteers for background checks will create a barrier to participation and impact on community programming, especially for those on low income and unemployed, and could even discourage them from volunteering. It also poses a significant impact on nonprofit organizations such as CHRC's ability to recruit and retain volunteers and add financial pressure to our already tight budgets. There were 3,004 CHRC's volunteers last year. They provided 97,930 hours of their valuable time within their community, Ottawa communities. The Canada Conference Board values volunteer hours as $27 an hour, which amounts to a financial value of $2,644,110 annually. A fee of $20 for these volunteers would be $60,080 diverted from direct community programming annually for us. This high return on investment is at risk if we make it harder for nonprofits to engage and hire volunteers. This increase the cost of the background checks will have a negative economic impact if it goes ahead. CHRCs are committed to actively reviewing all background screening practices to reduce the impact of demand for them, though we must also ensure the safety of vulnerable populations we serve who interact with volunteers, such as children, isolated seniors, and those with disabilities or living with mental health conditions, or cognitive impairments, and newcomers that do not speak English and French. It is important to note that background checks are also mandated by legislation, such as Child Care Act for early on programs, and a requirement for many nonprofit insurance plans. The background checks provided by the OPS are an important and essential community service. Over the years, OPS has worked to make the necessary investments and ensured a proper cost recovery models to make this service sustainable. For all those reasons mentioned above, we encourage that you continue to make necessary investments by approving option B, which is the only option that recognizes volunteer contribution while at the same time mitigating the impact on employees. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you both. Our last speaker is Susan Love, Circles of Support and Accountability.
No. That's on now? Good. Thank you for the this consultation process. I appreciate it. My name is Susan Love, and I'm the Director of Circles of Support and Accountability. It's also known as COSA. It's a reintegration program for people coming out of prison, specifically who have committed sexual offenses. And the Ottawa branch is, we're the only one locally. We also operate in 17 other cities across Canada. Research shows that those who have participated in COSA, they have a reoffense rate, the reoffense rate drops by 70 to 80% compared to those who are not involved. So our program is based on volunteers from the community. And without them, I really believe that our volunteer recruitment would suffer. If we had to, we are a nonprofit, all of us across the country. If we had to cover the cost, we'd be looking at approximately, just here in Ottawa, we have about 50 volunteers. We'd be looking at a cost of approximately $1,000 a year that we would have to raise or take out of our operational budget. So considering the fact that, we're a considerable contribution to public safety, right across Canada, but particularly here in Ottawa, that's what we're talking about today, I urge you to choose option B. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here. We'll now go to questions to staff. I just had a couple I wanted to start with. The first one pertains to the first slide where you indicated that the number of background checks has doubled between 2013 and today, or 2018, to 90,000. So presumably 45,000 checks in 2013, and in 2018 there were 90,000. To what do we attribute that dramatic rise in the number of background checks?
A significant increase lately in the 2016-2017 period has come from the Uber organization. So that was one driver of the increase, as well as the increased participation in youth sports. Those are two of the key drivers of the background check increase, as well as the general population increases over that time.
And is there any way, like, if I'm volunteering or I'm working at the Y and I'm volunteering for a number of organizations, do I have to get a different background check for every single organization, or is there a way to make it one?
That's really out of our hands, unfortunately. Those, as one of the previous delegations mentioned, there are regulations set by the RCMP related to background checks, as well as each organization has their risk management policies that they have in place about sharing. So that is really out of the OPS's hands, as well as other police services' hands.
But organizations could theoretically get together and agree to share?
Yes, they could.
Okay. And then I just wanted to ask about option B, because obviously it seems in some measure to be the best of both worlds. I mean, it's kind of choosing between two not great options, A and C. Either volunteers pay a fee, or the employment sector, who have a lot of, minimum wage income earning summer students and everything else, are charged more than the actual cost. So neither one seems like a great solution. But my concern about option B is that it won't be sustainable. I know we put $400,000 in the budget for this year, so option B would get us to the end of December. But then we would have a budget pressure of how much for 2020?
No, we wouldn't have a budget pressure for 2020 from option B. None of the options give us the budget pressure moving forward.
Including option B does not.
Including option B.
But it's using that $400,000.
Correct.
So we'd have to continue the $400,000.
Correct.
Isn't that a budget pressure?
No, it's not incremental. It's built into the budget in 2019, and it would carry forward.
I see. Okay, thank you. Member Smallwood.
Thank you. I want to say I really respect and appreciate the members of the audience speaking, and this has been a really challenging item for the board to deal with. But I did have a question. One of the items that many of the delegations mentioned was the impact on volunteers if there was a charge of $20, or even indeed if there was a charge of $10, I think. And I just wondered if staff, one of the things that led me to support the staff, or leads me to support the staff recommendation, is the fact that it would appear that most volunteer organizations and volunteers across the province do pay an amount of at least somewhere in excess of $10, and the average is $20. And I'm just wondering, to the point that was raised, and I guess, was there any way you could look at if this paying a fee meant that there was less volunteerism in these other cities than there is currently in Ottawa? Is there some way, if we can see, the comments have made that if we put any charge on, it would have a detrimental impact on volunteers in the city? Do we have a higher rate of volunteerism because we have zero than the other cities do? Is that something you were able to look at, and can you give us any comments on that?
That's an excellent question. Thank you very much. That isn't something that we looked at, so I don't have an answer for you at this time. It is something that we could look at in the future.
Well, I guess as a follow-up to that was just the other thing that I think concerned me about option B was that one of the principles that we gave and that you attempted to do was that we not have cross-subsidization. So effectively, option B leaves their employment people subsidizing the volunteers. And that just didn't seem quite fair. So those were the two things, and I guess you can't answer one of them, but the other, I think we know the answer to. So that's what led me to think that as much as it was very difficult, and I appreciate all the comments, I felt that option C was the one that was the fairest, given what we see in the province and given what we're faced with in terms of not having one sector subsidizing another. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just one correction to a piece of information I just gave, and it's thanks to my manager of records. They just clarified that legislatively records checks cannot be shared amongst organizations. So I apologize for giving that incorrect information, but I wanted to correct that for the record, that legislatively records checks cannot be shared amongst organizations.
Thank you.
If you have additional questions to that, my manager would be happy to come down and further share and expand on that.
Does anybody have any questions on that? Do you want to bring them? Yeah, bring the manager down. Yeah.
So the question is, why can't police record checks be shared? So the way the legislation is written, it's written in the singular tense for the simple reason that for vulnerable sector queries, which is a pardoned sex offense registry, the minister needs to disclose that information. He needs to know for what position and for what role that volunteer will have.
Is that it for you, Member Smallwood? Yes. Okay, Member Egley.
Well, that explanation sort of circumvented my question. So you're saying the minister signs off on every release of information?
Where there is a pardon for a sexually based offense? Yes. The Minister of Public Safety, which is federal, right? Because this is federal legislation.
Right. Okay. It just seems to run contrary to common sense.
So the reasoning behind it is that because it is a pardon has been granted, there needs to be, I guess, a fair decision on, and it's not arbitrarily just given by a system, but really somebody that sits down and looks at the role and responsibility of the volunteer or employment position. And that is the reason why.
Okay.
Thank you, Member Egley. Member Blasteen.
So just for clarity, I understand that the police service or the ministry cannot release that information to multiple volunteer organizations, but why could the person who is applying to be a volunteer not present that information to multiple organizations?
Give me 1 sec. So because it is decided on the role and responsibility, so that's why the legislation is written in the singular tense. So for example, a teacher applies to a volunteer position where the exposure to a vulnerable sector could be much reduced, the minister could disclose it for the teacher and not for the other position.
However, that really doesn't clarify why if somebody's received a pardon and they're applying to positions, let's say at a daycare and at a camp, and for let's say a sports team, they're applying for volunteer positions at 3 different similar ones, why can they not present that? I understand that the ministry does it for a specific, but it could be still shared, and then that other organization could essentially say, you know, we want one specifically for us, but the person applying for volunteer position should be able to share their information. In fact, for full disclosure, I would think that the organization would want them, even if they've been given a pardon, would want them to have that information at their, I wouldn't want one of my grandchildren on a team with somebody who's been convicted of a sexual offense and then, you know, received a pardon under whatever circumstances, and yet, you know, because this wasn't disclosed or it wasn't disclosable, and the volunteer themselves was not compelled to disclose that, even with consideration, I would still think that it would be something that could be shared by the person, although not by the service, I understand, not by the ministry, I understand, but by the person themselves. They should be able to share that information or be willing to pay the $20.
So that property, the police record check, belongs to that person once it's turned back to them. What they in turn do with it, it's not up to us to decide as a police service. But for the legal requirement of the dissemination of criminal record information, we need to know what the position and what role that person will be, for the reason that we're querying the pardoned sex offense registry.
I do understand that. I'm just, if it's 3 similar type positions, the certificate should be able to be applicable to all of them. If it's a different type of position, then I understand it's a separate process. But if they're, like I said, a sports team, a daycare, and a camp, they're 3 very similar. The vulnerability is going to be the same, and frankly, the certificate's going to give the same information in the end, because it's 3 package type of. Anyway, that's just I understand it's not the police service. I think it's up to the individual and the organizations. But.
And I think it's important to bring us back to remember that we don't set the policies within the volunteer organizations about how they utilize them. We run off the legislation, and that's how we provide them to the individuals. So if there's latitude within volunteer sectors to look at how they could group together to accept records checks, that would be good, but those aren't things that we control.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, the recommendation is for option C. And I guess from my perspective, I'd like to thank everyone who came out this evening and participated. There's no easy solution. As the number of police record checks has dramatically risen, it has put a lot of pressure on us, and our previous fee structure just no longer works for us. And I know all the board members know we're coming into a very, very difficult budget in 2020. So we have to make some tough decisions. And one of the principles that we've been using to guide us is that we not do cross-subsidization. I think a fair principle is that there not be a subsidy, one group charged more than they should be for another group, and that, of course, leads to recommendation C, but unfortunately means for the first time we would be introducing a small fee for volunteers, which we've never had, and we've proudly never had that. I think we're the only municipality in Ontario that we're aware of that hasn't charged a fee for volunteers. And as much as I personally would love to see that continue, as I'm sure all of my board colleagues would, with 90,000 police checks having to be done every year, there's just a reality that it costs money, and it's not in the police services budget to subsidize that going forward to that extent, nor do I think it's fair. Like, we heard from organizations like the Y and others that for them, having students come in is very important, and it was the cost, $90 that we had, was just unaffordable. So it's, you know, it feels like we're making choices amongst all poor choices, and if we had more money, we would happily continue with the status quo, but I don't think that's a reality for us. So as the chair of the board, I'm going to recommend to my colleagues that we accept the staff recommendation for option C. So carried? Carried. And thank you all for being here. Okay, turning then to item number 3, strategic direction for the Ottawa Police Service 2019-2020, and there is a presentation.
So yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We'll just let Cam and Diane set up. So thank you very much. You can advance the first slide. As the board is aware, there's legislative requirement that every police service and every police services board has a strategic plan or a business plan that's renewed at least every 3 years. So our current plan expired at the end of 2018, and we're before you today with our new with the new plan that we've done quite a bit of work with the board in developing. So this plan will be our 8th plan since 1995, and it's built based on the starting of public opinion survey, member census, and member engagement survey. From that, we've worked several days through several sessions with the Police Services Board and to look to develop on how we can align ourselves to best deliver the policing services for this community. Over the past 8 months, we've worked with the previous board and now this new board, as we've worked with the previous executive and now the new executive, as we look to come up with this plan to move ahead. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Deputy Chief Jaswell, who will present the outcomes of all that work.
Thank you, Chief. So the board has seen this, and I know we presented the overall plan as Member Valaket said at the Policy and Governance Committee, but just in terms of some of the highlights around the changing policing environment that we're operating in. As the board knows, we have a rapidly changing community in terms of cultural and linguistic profiles of our communities, the needs of our communities, and certainly the expectations that our community has of policing services. We also continue to see a large demand for what we would say are social disorder issues, non-policing issues, whether that be mental health, substance use disorder issues, and our recent challenges, continuing challenge with opiate use. There's also the changing legislative environment, and the Chair and I've had a chance to talk about the Community Safety Plan as an opportunity for the police service and certainly other city partners to look at how we are aligning services and resources to break out of a policing versus a community investment type silos and actually look at services across our city. We also see changing nature of crime and certainly borderless crime through the use of technology, the internet, etc., increasing the complexity, methodology, and cost of police investigations. I think it's important to state again that the public's expectations for accountability and transparency of policing is increasing. Certainly the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women inquiry, several studies around racial profiling in policing, and certainly our own work around traffic stop race data collection are key pieces that help us understand that in fact we need to change the way that we are delivering policing services to meet the needs of those communities. We continue to tackle and address our own pressures from a cop-to-pop staffing perspective as we reorient our service delivery model. The board is aware as well that we've engaged a number of different strategies to understand the internal and external environment through the research methodology, which was expanded in the last business plan cycle. Public trust in the service remains high, but there's an increasing number of residents who indicate that trust is declining, and I think we can certainly say anecdotally in the feedback we're getting that our Indigenous, racialized, and diverse communities are particularly challenged with public trust and confidence in the police service, and so that needs to be something that concerns us. The public wants increased police presence and familiarity with officers at a neighborhood level, and we see that in their comments around wanting to be and feel more connected to the police service and those officers that are keeping their communities safe. We also know from a member perspective that engagement internally continues to be a challenge, and we need to do a better job around health and wellness supports for members. I know there's been a lot of innovations that we've introduced in the last number of years, but that continues to be something that we are tackling in terms of making sure that we have members ready to do their assigned duties. If we go to the next slide, I believe, we met with the board in March, and we reconfirmed, in fact, that the vision, mission, values that we currently have are continue to be valid and current. We reconfirmed the 3 priority areas of community, members, and service, and we took the strategic direction from June 6th to keep the plan simple and to focus on the next 18 months, the period of transition that we're currently going through. So what you have essentially is a business plan light, is what we'd call it. And again, the 4 priority areas that are now represented within the strategic plan are around community policing, equity, diversity, and inclusion, members, and modernization. And we've chosen to focus on those activity areas that are wholly within our control because of the short time frame of the strategic plan. If you look at the actual areas, you'll see the focus on advancing our community policing response, and that's specifically in relation to work that the interim chief's leading around neighborhood policing teams, and our continued focus around street violence, violence against women, and road safety. In terms of the areas of member support, again, we're looking to make sure that we're optimizing the use of the resources we have, both civilian and sworn, so that we're providing effective and timely response to community needs. We're looking to expand, as I said, our wellness strategies and options for members so that we're addressing their needs in terms of being ready for their duties. From a EDI perspective, we're looking to bring together a number of activities that have been ongoing for the last number of years under the EDI umbrella and put together a single work plan that addresses EDI issues, and we'll add the identifying information report within that, as well as establishing employee resource groups internally to help support our racialized and diverse members so that they're actually able to bring their best selves to work every day and contribute in our environment. And finally, in terms of modernizing the work environment, we're looking at a number of elements around the modernization roadmap. That work continues. Next Generation 911. Certainly you're going to hear about our South Division campus in a presentation next, and that work is also continuing. And as well the work that we have around our radio project and the implementation of that radio project continues as well. In terms of next steps, based on any feedback that the board may have today, we're happy to incorporate that. We had an opportunity to socialize the plan as it stands now with our senior leaders on June 14th at a leadership meeting that we had internally. Once this is finalized, we're going to start communicating that externally as well through our partners, as well as through social media, to make sure that the community is aware of the strategic direction that we are taking. From a reporting perspective, we are continuing to try to move from outputs to outcomes. As much as we would like to focus on outcomes, that is a challenge that we are currently engaged with. We're certainly not where we need to be from my perspective, but that I know our team in PP&A is working hard to get us to that point. And I think the last thing I'll mention around reporting is that traditionally we have done large-scale surveys of our community to understand where we're at, and we are looking at innovations that will help us do pulse checks so that we'd have more timely information at shorter time intervals to help us ensure that we're on track in terms of some of the decisions and changes that we're making internally. So that's something that we are looking forward to in terms of innovations that we can bring to the board and make sure that you are comfortable with our progress. Again, we're going to have to start the next business plan and process quite soon. So if the board is comfortable with this plan, we'd actually begin that work within the next few months to look at our next 3-year business plan. And we're happy to obviously work with you on that one as well. But I'm confident that the plan that we'll put forward today meets the current needs of the police service, current needs of our members, and certainly, most importantly, the needs of our community. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Jaswell. Okay, we'll start with Member Smallwood, followed by Member Nur.
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation, and having been through the whole thing, I can see it all pulling together. Now, the one comment I have is on page 3 or slide 3, which I guess is kind of a 40,000-foot look at things. And one thing that was really loud and clear from the community was the important, which you mentioned specifically earlier, about forming relationships. And I just wonder if in that it wouldn't make sense to say establish neighborhood-based problem-solving teams to address local public safety concerns and establish relationships with the community. Because I think that's one thing that certainly I heard loud and clear from everybody is that they really wanted to have that relationship going on in their communities. So that's my only comment on it.
I think that's certainly the intention. We're happy to make that clear.
Perfect. Member Nerman.
Thank you for the good presentation, DCG Jaswal. Concerning this South Division, which is a huge facility, is there a plan to utilize this space beyond police services to engage and promote public support, like relocating a few of the city services, which encourages police-public partnership? If you have some thoughts on that.
It's a great question. I know we have a presentation on South Division. Jeff, should we hold that for Pam and her team, or would you prefer to do that just in terms of the South Division? Or?
Yeah, why don't we have a presentation on the South Division shortly? Your question should be answered.
So you will be covering this on that?
So, or you can answer. You could ask the question at that time.
That's fine. Thanks.
Anyone else? Member Velikat?
I applaud you on this plan. I like the direction that you're taking. I feel that 18 months is a very short period of time to accomplish all of these tasks. Do you feel that you will be able to do so? And when will we hear back from you on where you're at with rolling this out?
No, it's a very fair question. So I think the elements that we've included in the business plan, because of the short time frame, are things that are already underway. And the other important component of that they are activities that are wholly within the control of the police service. And so I think that makes it more realistic in terms of its achievability. The business plan and our performance around the business plan is something that we regularly communicate, and certainly we're happy to take questions in terms of our performance at any time from the board.
Thank you. Member Egley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm really pleased to see the Central Triangle advanced community policing. Where I'm concerned, though, is are we speaking the same language? is the force speaking the same language as the community as to what community policing means. We've run into this before. We saw that with the last rollout, didn't meet expectations of what the community thought community policing was. So I guess my question is what steps is the force taking to make sure that when they say they're advancing community policing, that they're advancing the community policing that the community actually wants to see, as opposed to what the force believes is the right way to go? It may be the same, I'm not saying it's not, but how do we make sure we have that synergy, that understanding between the service provider and the service receiver?
So I'm glad you used service there, because that's what we regularly use is talk about us as a police service. You're absolutely right. So it's very focused for us as we roll out these neighborhood-based policing teams, that every community and every neighborhood is unique, and the services that they want, need, and expect from their police service and their neighborhood-based policing teams are different and unique. We know in the past we've had challenges as we've talked about the community-based policing that we deliver, as opposed to what the community feels they need as a community policing service. So as we're looking to develop, and in the process of doing that now, these neighborhood teams, we're going to the specific neighborhoods where we are going to base them, and we're having dialogues with key community members and community groups to get their input on what are the key activities that those teams should be involved in, what are the key community safety, low-level crime, social disorder issues that affect those communities, and how can we be the most effective in building community safety and public trust in policing. So you're bang on right. That's exactly what we're doing in each of those communities through this plan.
So if I follow what you said, then that your rollout this time round is not going to be a cookie cutter. It's going to be different community by community in terms of what you're hearing from community associations, religious groups, you know, whatever you consider stakeholders to be. So it may be a little bit different downtown than it is in the suburbs, than it is in the rural areas. Is that what we're expected to take away from the meeting tonight?
Yes, absolutely. So the neighborhood-based teams that we're rolling out, and as we spoke about at Policy and Governance Committee, we'll be bringing a fulsome presentation back to the board in September about what that looks like, what those teams are looking like, and the activities they're going to be engaged in. But I guarantee you, in every neighborhood that we're going into and that we're deploying in, we're having dialogues with the community to make sure that we're meeting their needs, as opposed to telling them, as we may have in the past, here's what community policing is and we're already doing it.
So just one final question. So you say in every community that we're going into, which suggests that you're not going into every community.
So we continue to develop the neighborhood-based policing teams that we're talking about here are going to be in 3 communities, 3 sectors. They'll be in Vanier-Overbrook, they'll be in the south end of Ottawa, and they'll be in the Caldwell area. And those are the Caldwell-Carlington area. Those are the areas where we're focusing and doing our pilot on those neighborhood-based teams. And what we are doing is conducting an evaluation on how effective they are to deal with crime and social disorder issues in those and build community and public trust. From that, we'll be looking at rolling those out more broadly next year with the tweaks that we have from the evaluation. So that's where the start is in those 3 neighborhoods, and then a broader expansion after that.
Okay. So I said last question, but the question came from the answer that you just provided. So if I'm a resident in not in one of those 3 communities, during the period of this pilot, what can I expect to see in terms of community policing in my neighborhood?
So what you'll see is you'll continue to see the engagement of your community police officer. You'll continue to see your school resource officers in that area. Depending on where it is, you might see an increase in the bikes and beats unit in your areas, because they won't be in those 3 neighborhoods after we deploy those teams. And you'll still see the ability of our frontline officers to engage in the low-level crime and social disorder problem-oriented policing projects like we're starting to see a building of recently.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Egley. Anyone else received on the strategic direction? Received. Thank you. Item number 4, Ottawa Police Service 2018 Annual Report. Oh, we have to approve item 3. Approved? Okay.
So thank you very much. As you're aware, the annual report, we have a requirement to report by the end of June every year. So I'm going to turn it over to Cam and Diana to provide us the information around the 2018 annual report.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. So we're here today to provide you with a presentation on the 2018 OPS annual report. The annual report provides the board and public with information on the service's performance and highlights some of the people and program behind the numbers. It provides a comprehensive look at key crime, call, and traffic statistics for the City of Ottawa and its 23 wards. And it provides updates on projects and organizational initiatives that aim to help shape the future of policing in Ottawa. But really, the annual report is a progress report. We've done a lot of great work last year, and we know we still have a lot more work to do, as highlighted in our strategic direction. On this next slide, you'll see that the content of the annual report also builds upon some of the quarterly reports that are presented to the board each quarter throughout the year. And these are the requirements that are in our adequacy standards as well as board policy. So just for some example, the semi-annual status report on the strategic plan, the operational performance report, which provides detail on crime and calls for service, our workforce management report, which provides detail on our people, the complaints report, and financial status reports as some examples. What's new in the 2018 annual report is a more fulsome view of reported crime, the severity of crime, the crime rate, the clearance rate, and also some additional information around assistance to victims, road safety, calls for service, and use of force. We'll now walk you through some of the 2018 crime and call results and then provide highlights around our 3 strategic areas of focus: community, members, and service. So like many major cities in Canada, since 2016, we have seen an increase in the volume of reported crime. This includes the volume, the rate, and the severity. With the rise in the number of offenses, we've also seen a corresponding decline slightly in our clearance rate. These are cases that are cleared by charge or cleared by other means. And a closer look at those results beyond the total level will show that you'll see an increase in level 1 sexual assaults, level 1 assaults, robberies, as it relates to person-related offenses. And on the property side of things, you'll see an increase in theft under $5,000, frauds, break-and-enters, contributing to the trend. As a result of the increasing trend, what you'll also notice on the right-hand side is an increase in the number of arrests and charges. You'll also see a decline in the number of youth-related charges, but that also corresponds to an increase in the number of diversions through other means. Despite the recent increases, what you'll also see in the center is that Ottawa remains well below the national average, and as well as results experienced over a decade ago. The trend is still below where we have seen it historically. Something else contributing to the trend, as we noted in the past, is that we have made continuous changes to our environment in terms of our reporting mechanisms and our processes in terms of coding. So example being online report, and internal processes have evolved, as direction has come from Statistics Canada, specifically around things like the definition of unfounded sexual assaults, as you would have read in the media. But one of the things we noted in 2017 was we put in a process where we changed how we respond to high-frequency, low-risk calls, where specifically there was no suspect, no evidence, no immediate danger, or witness to be immediately interviewed at the scene. These types of calls now are actually taken by our police reporting unit agents, and they're subsequently followed up by investigators. So in the past, where we would have dispatched a police resource to that, and that may have been handled in a different way, it's now being coded as a criminal offense that's being handled downstream by investigators, so which has an impact in terms of the overall number of incidents. On the next slide here, you'll see some information around our core policing service responding to emergencies. You'll note that we receive about 340,000 requests for service annually. This includes both reports received online and reports or calls coming in through our comm center. Total demand in this area overall, online and calls, has increased by 5% last year. We're now north of 340,000 requests. Comparing to the previous year, you'll note that that was about 10,000 calls versus about nearly 5,000 reports. And our online reporting system, despite some challenges that we've had with it, has experienced a significant growth, 28% last year alone in terms of reports being received online. When we look at the most serious of calls that we handle, we receive on average about 3,500 of them. Here on this slide, you'll see that number is higher than that, 3,500 over the past 5 years, or 4,100 in 2018. And what we've seen driving the 5% increase is tiered response calls, so those calls that we're supporting our emergency service partners. Looking at response performance, so we have a service standard in terms of the amount of time it takes us to respond to priority 1 calls. Specifically, that's within 15 minutes, 95% of the time. And as you'll see, we're very close to that standard and have been for the last 5 years at about 94%. And lastly on this slide, I'll call out the service time measure, which is something we monitor in terms of the cumulative amount of time our officers spend responding to and managing calls for service. Despite the fact that it has declined slightly, 3%, it remains within the 5-year average. And as we've reported in our operational performance report, this remains within natural variation, so it's normal fluctuation that we see. So it's small. Diana will now provide some highlights around our 3 strategic areas of focus.
Thank you, Cameron. As you heard during the Chief's verbal report earlier this afternoon, policing is about more than enforcing the law, and you heard some great examples already. But we also make a difference by working with our partners in responding to emergencies. Another great example is when the tornadoes set down in the fall of 2018. The OPS responded within minutes, took the helm in forming a unified command. They set up a reception center, followed up with Ottawa residents to ensure they were safely accounted for, and then assisted with the cleanup. We also make a difference by delivering our core policing services and focusing our efforts where they're needed the most. Through our public opinion research and other engagement methods, we've heard loud and clear that changes need to be made to our service delivery model in terms of community policing, as our residents feel more in touch with the OPS when they're able to connect directly with an officer who's consistently in their neighborhoods. So in response, some changes were made in 2018, including dedicating a Bikes and Beats unit and increasing presence in the Market, Rideau, and Vanier areas during peak demand periods. We know we have more work to do to meet our community's expectations, and we've already started along a path to develop a neighborhood-based community policing model. 2018 also brought a major legislative change with the legalization of cannabis. This brought about new challenges related to traffic enforcement, but OPS was well prepared. We trained our officers to recognize drug impairment, late charges within the new law, and we updated our policies and procedures. To address the increase in violent crime in 2018, the OPS deployed new pivot teams. We developed an internal street violence and gang strategy, and we deployed more resources in certain areas of the city during the summer months. And we all saw that the Me Too movement gathered strength in 2018, and that contributed to the volume of reported violent crime related to sexual assaults. In response, the OPS trained additional resources and partners. We continued Ottawa's version of the Philadelphia Model Project, and we introduced a new facility dog to help support victims of crime. And traffic and road safety continue to be a top concern among our residents. Some highlights from 2018 include the introduction of a new dedicated traffic analyst, the purchase of ALPRs, and enhanced education and awareness campaigns such as Leave the Phone Alone and the STEP program. This section of the annual report speaks to our staff complement, the organization, outreach and recruiting efforts, member wellness, and exceptional calls for service. In terms of our demographics, from the budget process, we know that in 2018, the service had an approved complement of just over 2,000 full-time equivalents, and about 70% of our members are sworn. As you've already heard, the service is actively recruiting. We're looking to hire 500 new officers in the next 5 years. And as part of that recruitment process, we all want to ensure diversity among our workforce. And if you have any referrals, please send them our way. In an effort to do this, we've enhanced our outreach and recruiting efforts through things such as a new dedicated outreach and recruiting team. We hold special information sessions, and we've introduced a mentorship program for applicants. And you'll also recall that in December 2017, we conducted a member census. The results were reported to the board in November of 2018, and they're also included as a key input to our strategic plan. And while we've made progress in some areas, we still have work to do around equity, diversity, and inclusion. Providing our members with training opportunities is critical to our operations and member engagement. And in 2018, we made some changes in terms of member development. For example, we introduced a new training and development directorate. We rolled out the second phase of the developmental rotation program, and we made improvements to our member transfer program. Our members are our most important resource, and the OPS continues to invest in their wellness to make sure that our people are healthy and resilient. Highlights in 2018 include the launch of the Peer Support Program and enhancements to the Real You program. Building stronger relationships and trust with our communities is a key focus, and OPS takes this responsibility seriously. This section of the report includes information on some of the good work done by a few of our sections. It also talks to the new Community Equity Council and also to awards and volunteers. Based on the feedback from our communities, in 2018, the OPS relaunched its community-based consultative group. And this new Community Equity Council's role is to provide advice and insight to the police on ways to strengthen the relationships with Indigenous, faith-based, and racialized communities or organizations in Ottawa. It's co-chaired by the OPS and a community member, and they're currently forming working groups to examine specific issues and develop collaborative solutions. We also know that relationship building is integral to every aspect of policing. And while every member is responsible for relationship management, there are specific groups within OPS, including the Community Development section, the Diversity and Race Relations section, and the Community Police Officers and School Resource Officers, who have this as part of their main function. And we also host Partnership in Action community consultation sessions. We held 4 in 2018. We also hold separate individual community engagement activities, ranging from Police Week to discussion forums on things like the diversity audit. And we couldn't deliver effective public safety services without the service delivery partners such as Ottawa Fire, Ottawa EMS, Ottawa Victim Services, and others. And by working together with other partners such as Crime Prevention Ottawa, Crime Stoppers, and Safer Roads Ottawa. And our volunteers are also key to developing and maintaining these community relationships. And another example is our OPS Hoop Stars basketball team, who attended more than 70 events at schools and community centers last year. And each year, OPS hosts a gala to celebrate policing and raise money to support our community partners. The 2018 recipients were the Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group, who received a little over $71,000 towards its at-risk youth program, the Great Canadian Theatre Company, who received almost $12,000 towards its youth drama program, and the Beechwood Cemetery receiving almost $16,000 towards the OPS Memorial. Since 2010, the gala has raised nearly $1 million for 14 organizations within our community. And just a heads up, tickets go on sale very soon for the 2019 gala, which will be held on Saturday, November the 9th. And in conclusion, this presentation provides some of the highlights from last year. We encourage everyone to read the full report, either in its PDF format or online by section of interest. Both methods are available on the OPS website. We also look forward to continuing to report to the board and to the public throughout 2019 as we work towards achieving our vision of becoming a trusted partner in community safety. Thank you, Madam Chair. This concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Miller, Mr. Hopgood. Are there any questions? Member Valiquette.
Not a question, just a comment. Thank you for your presentation. You went into a lot of detail, very interesting stories, a great read, so thank you. I just wanted to bring your attention to page 64 in the little box that you say, "Did you know?" And it reads, less than 1% of all calls attended by the OPS require the use of force. In fact, most calls are resolved solely with officer presence and communication. Effective communication and de-escalation continue to be at the foundation of police-public interactions. That's a pretty remarkable comment. Can you give us a bit more detail on that?
So, yeah, I can speak to that. We have about 350,000 calls for service a year. We probably have well over 1 million contacts with the public a year. And based on these numbers, less than 1% of our interactions with the community, as it relates to calls for service, result in the use of force. We train heavily around de-escalation training. We've actually really increased our presence, our knowledge, and our training to our members in terms of how to communicate and how to de-escalate situations. So that has become part of how we engage in all of our interactions in the past and then moving ahead. So in that, we're very proud of this statistic to say that on very, very few occasions, as our members engage with the public, do they need to use force.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your presentation received on the report. Turning then to item number 5, South Facility Phase A, 1 site plan.
So thank you, Madam Chair. While the team is getting organized at the table, I just wanted to introduce quickly. So the South Facility represents the largest capital project ever undertaken by the OPS. It is entering a very exciting phase, and Pam Mills, Chief Physical Environment Officer, and her team are here today to provide the board an update. Thank you.
Okay, we're all set to go. So it's actually a very exciting day to be here because we get to present you with our new South Facility, which is a big moment. I think in any services history, it's wonderful to bring new real estate on that will support our operations and will serve our community in a meaningful way. So pleased to be here today to talk to you, and I'd like to introduce you to a few members of my team. Carol Roper, who is the Director of Facilities Planning and Project Delivery, who you've seen with me before. Pauline DeCare, Senior Project Manager on the South Facility Project, and David Stone, who is one of the architects on our architectural team, who is with Moriyama and Toshima and CS&P Architects. So as you know, this building is required to support significant growth in the south end of the city. It'll be an impressive 3-story building that will be LEED certified, and it'll measure approximately 209,000 square feet when it's complete. Frontline officers will be dispatched into the community that they serve, and the community will actually be able to come to our location and receive front desk services and a wide range of services. The new building will provide opportunities to centralize our frontline specialized support teams, that's Marine Dive Trail, Tactical, and K9, to name a few, and that will help us to streamline operations and service delivery. When the facility is 100% complete, we'll also have a new communications center on site, as well as the corporate support directorate, or a significant portion of it, and that is groups like my group, finance, people and culture, and recruiting. So back in 2017, you'll recall we presented the board with a campus approach for the entire 15-acre site on Prince of Wales Drive. When we began our work with Moriyama and Toshima and CS&P Architects in 2018, we explored other site development opportunities that led to an opportunity to optimize and densify the site, pursuing savings that could be used to offset some of the pressures that were coming out through the design process, and allowed for better co-location opportunities of our services. You'll recall that we came to see you in April this year and brought forward a revised plan that fully integrates the original Phase 1 facility and the Phase 2 facility into one single building instead of two. The project is now simply called South Facility. In April, we also mentioned to you that we'd undertaken a significant amount of pre-consultation with the communities surrounding our site to seek their input and feedback at the start of design and prior to applying for site plan application. This allowed us to address community concerns and build feedback into our design right from the start. Some of the comments we received from the community related to green space, to safety, both from the vehicle perspective as well as pedestrians, access to the site and traffic control, and noise concerns. Specifically, here's what we heard from the community and how we have responded through the design process. The community wanted green design features with efforts made to preserve green space and the natural features of the site. There was interest in preserving trees along the southern edge of the site and ensuring that the building blends in with the natural environment. You'll see through our presentation today, the architects have been particularly sensitive to the building massing, blending the building into the natural environment, and using materials that complement the natural surroundings. We also heard concerns about the safety of neighbors and residents of Carlton Lodge and not impeding the natural elements and recreation that are currently enjoyed along Lodge Road. Again, in the design that you'll see, that Lodge Road remains intact and unimpeded by our facility, and that the activities currently enjoyed by our local community will remain as is. In addition, there won't be any OPS traffic on Lodge Road. All access and egress is off of Prince of Wales, and it's done through very well-designed traffic patterns. We also addressed Carlton Lodge's concerns by working collaboratively with them to address the access and egress solutions for their staff parking lot. So we've had a good relationship with them in establishing solutions. Another concern that was expressed that is very common when we build facilities is the perception that lights and sirens will be an issue for the neighbors and the residents in the surrounding areas. As our frontline officers deploy into the communities from the station at the start of their shift, and not directly from the facility to a call, lights and sirens are not a concern, and we were able to address that in the pre-consultation and talk to the community about that. Finally, the community spoke about noise concerns during construction. And although that's one of those things we will not be able to prevent entirely, I'm afraid, we certainly have a big sensitivity to the issue, and we will do everything in our power to ensure that the impact on our neighbors is minimal. We'll work within the city noise bylaws, and we've established a very reasonable construction schedule that will minimize the amount of after-hour work that's required. The noisiest period we expect to be at the beginning of the construction, which will be during site mobilization, the excavation process, as well as the preparation of our foundations. We're also pleased to report that in addition to the concerns that were expressed, we received lots of positive feedback from the community, commending the OPS for its community-focused approach and our efforts to engage early. So in May, we filed that site application form that we talked about, and tomorrow evening, we're going, starting at 6:30, the city and the OPS will be hosting a public open house as part of the site plan application process. It'll be held at the Rideau Valley Conservation Center, located at 3889 Rideau Valley Drive, which is not far from the site of our new future beautiful building. Today, we're very pleased to have David Stone with us from Moriyama and Toshima here to present you the design of this exciting new facility. The architects have done an excellent job on behalf of the board, the community, and the OPS by creating a facility that's respectful of the site and surrounding community, while also establishing a civic presence for Ottawa Police on Prince of Wales Drive. We look forward to receiving community feedback tomorrow during the open house. So with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of everyone at Moriyama and Toshima and CS&P Architects, I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. We've been looking forward to updating the board and the public on the design of South Campus for quite some time, so thank you very much for the time. Today, I'm just going to briefly walk you through some of the project background, some of the early inspirations. We'll do a quick review of the site plan and how the site will operate, and then lastly, look at some proposed images of the building at this point in time. So firstly, as we embarked on this project over a year ago, we began with a survey of the existing OPS building portfolio. As you know, it spans about 70 years of built heritage, a variety of architectural styles and expressions. It'd be no surprise to you that Huntmar is the most recent example. It's very well loved by staff and the community, and we've made sure to take some cues from that. So Huntmar will actually be a standard for a lot of the elements incorporated into the south facility. And as you'll see later, we've also made an effort to reference some of its architectural language in hopes of creating more of a recognizable image for OPS. Next, moving on to the site and surrounding context. As you know, we have a beautiful 15-acre site at the confluence of the Rideau and Jock Rivers in Barrhaven. The actual OPS parcel is part of a larger 27-acre city-owned site, which includes the Carlton Lodge long-term care home immediately to the north. The site has spectacular views out to the Rideau River. It has a strong presence on Prince of Wales Drive, and it's surrounded by the Heart's Desire neighborhood immediately, to the west. It's also surrounded by a variety of city and NCC-owned parkland, which will be a tremendous opportunity and amenity for OPS staff. The map here just highlights some of the 7 kilometers of multi-use trails directly accessible from the site, which can be used by OPS members. They're sure to be loved. The image on the top right actually shows the nearby Vimy Memorial Bridge, which is really the only large civic structure in the area. So we've taken some cues from that as well in the building design. Zooming into the site proper, we're showing here some of the key environmental considerations that played into the site design and the building design. Firstly, I'll just point out that Carlton Lodge on the right side of this image is north, so when I'm referring to northeast, west, and south, the right side of the image is north here. I'll say that The white arrow here demonstrates quite a significant slope that we're dealing with on this site. It really doesn't, it's not really perceivable as you're driving by the site on Prince of Wales, but there is an 18-foot or 6-meter slope down the site, which presented some challenges to us, but also some opportunities. In blue, we're looking at the predominant winds, which are blowing from the southwest. And then lastly, in orange, the crescent-shaped orange shape there is the sun path, which, as you can see, is rising in the east over the Rideau and falling in the west over Heart's Desire. So these are some of the key considerations in designing the site and the building. So all of those points, along with OPS operational requirements, of course, were influential in the development of the site plan, now shown here. As you may recall, and as Pam spoke about, the 2017 master plan actually proposed a phased approach across the site from north to south with multiple buildings. As we began work on the project, we thought it prudent to explore the option of incorporating Phase B on top of Phase A as a third story. And again, Pam pointed to some of this earlier, but we felt there was a benefit in cost savings due to reduced excavation and site work. It obviously would allow more preservation of land for future development. Lastly, one building obviously results in a much more efficient floor plan for operations, but also for staff collaboration. Actually, one more point, the extra story also results in more of a civic presence on Prince of Wales, which we feel is an important design consideration for a community building like a police station. So that idea was accepted, and it's reflected in the site plan shown here, which is largely a 3-story building burned into the hillside. You'll also note the angle of the building here, which was driven by some of those key environmental considerations shown earlier. So that angle is meant to optimize natural light, control that light inside the building for users, and it also actually helps frame and direct views out to the natural site and to the river beyond. In terms of vehicular circulation here and access to the site, the entire project team felt it was very important to minimize the impact to Lodge Road, which, as you know, is a quiet residential street, which residents of Carlton Lodge actually use for strolling and walking. The nearby community also uses Lodge Road to connect to the multi-use paths north and south of the site. So we've made sure to limit access to and from Prince of Wales Drive. That being said, we have maintained the back-of-house connection to Carlton Lodge staff parking lot. But principally, most of the traffic, we anticipate more than 80% of daily traffic will be using the intersection at the north end of the site, which is shown on the right side of the site in this image. But we have added a secondary entry and exit for staff and fleet vehicles at the south end of the site. This is both for convenience, given the size of the staff parking lot, but it also provides redundancy for exiting for fleet vehicles. Visitors will be entering the site at the main entry. They can immediately turn right into a visitor parking loop where the collision reporting center is located, visitor parking, as well as the main lobby and entry to the building. From there, fleet and staff vehicles can proceed through the secure zone, which is indicated by the red dotted line on the image. They can take an immediate right into the covered and closed specialty vehicle garage, or proceed further and enter the open-air fleet parkade. And lastly, they can access the large staff parking lot, which wraps around the bottom of the building or the east side of the building. That's also where O&M and shipping and receiving would be located. We've also pedestrian, it's important to note, we've also incorporated a pedestrian gate on Lodge Road, and that will provide access to the river and to nearby amenities and walking trails for OPS staff, but it would also provide access for members coming to work on alternate means of transportation. Okay, now moving on to the architectural design. But before we do, I'll just note that the illustrations we're about to show, they're just a snapshot in time, so it's in, we're only at 33% right now, so it's important to know these materials, finishes, and details may evolve as the project continues on to completion. Shown here is the material palette we're proposing for the project. So these are all natural, robust, long-lasting materials that speak to both the civic nature of the project, but most importantly, we feel fit in really well with the natural surroundings of the site. You can see some of these materials are similar to those used at Huntmar, as I spoke to earlier. And we've also made use of white as a subtle nod to the Vimy Memorial Bridge. And now for the perspectives. Our first image shown here is the main visitor parking loop, the front plaza, and the main public entrance to the building. You can see here, even though it's a 3-story building, it only appears as if it's a 2-story building from Prince of Wales due to it being bermed into the hillside. You can imagine how different this would feel if we hadn't incorporated Phase B and it was just a long, slender 1-story building. The main public entrance here is very clearly identifiable, shown as the glass box. We've made a distinct effort to make the community hub, that front lobby of the building, as open and accessible as possible with ample glass and daylight. A strategy also we've taken to try and break up, this is a very large building, so we've tried to break that up by making each volume of the building slightly different in terms of its materiality, but obviously they'd be complementary. The next view is taken a little further south on Prince of Wales Drive. You can see in the foreground here on the right side of the image that secondary entry and exit to and from the staff parking lot with that lot shown beyond in the distance. This image also starts to give you a sense of that 6-meter slope across the site. So you can see the building actually becomes a 3-story building on the east. Also, what's illustrated here are louvered sunshades across that whole south facade of the building, and these will help control daylight. The way we've oriented the building will help us optimize that to limit glare in the office spaces, but it also provides a sense of security and privacy to staff who are working in the building, particularly at night. Next, we have a view a little further north from Lodge Road. This is near the corner of Carlton Lodge parking lot. Here you can see the main entrance gates to the secure portion of the site on the right, with the entrances to the specialty garage and the fleet parkade also on the right. We've proposed some Boston ivy clad screens around the parkade, as well as ample landscaping, and this is just to provide some visual privacy to operational spaces, but it's also dual purpose in that it's providing a nicer view for Carlton Lodge residents located at the north. As you know, majority of people traveling by the site are in a vehicle, with the exception of the Carlton Lodge residents, which we'll be looking at it throughout the day. Also, in the middle of the image here, you can see the large 3-story glass atrium. It's sort of the heart of the secure portion of the facility, where members will be mixing on a daily basis. It'll also be a beacon at night when lit up. The last thing I'd like to point out here is just, again, in an effort to minimize the size of this building, it's a very large building, and how we've attempted to do that on the east side is to basically break it up vertically. So we're trying to make the lower level look more part of the landscape as if it's emerging from the hillside, and then we're sitting more of a 2-story volume on top of it. And again, that's an attempt to try to minimize the impact of its height from Lodge Road and surrounding residences. The next image is basically zoomed in from the previous image, again on the east side of the building facing the Rideau River. This image is where the majority of staff will be coming and going on a daily basis. It's the main staff entry. Again, you can see that idea of the lighter 2-story box on top of a lower level. We've also employed some vertical fins here on the east and west facade to control some of the harsh morning and late sun, but also, again, to provide a sense of security and safety to OPS staff. Again, you can see the main atrium and staff lunch terrace on the upper level of the parkade. This image summarizes the exterior design. Sorry if it's a bit hard to read on the screen, but this basically will demonstrate to you the visitor parking loop in the foreground of the image, as well as the connection to Carlton Lodge. On the left here, you can also make sense of some of the areas that were a bit harder to see in the other images, the FLSS courtyard, which is a courtyard for the specialty vehicles, as well as the upper level of the open-air fleet parkade. Here you can also really see how the angle of the building starts to frame and direct views out over the site and the Rideau River beyond. Last but not least, this is an image of the main community hub of the building, the front lobby, situated on the northeast corner of the building. This main public entry will be generous in size and height. It'll be exceptionally well lit. We're aiming to make it visible to the community, welcoming, and the space will provide direct connections actually to both the community police center, shown in the middle of this image, and the community boardroom, which will be located right behind where we're standing in this image. It'll have ample seating, self-reporting kiosks, again shown in the middle of this image, a large number of service wickets shown on the right, and the space will be accessible, inclusive, and has been designed for ease of use and wayfinding. And with that, that completes this portion of our afternoon. I hope you feel excited by the design you've seen here today. We certainly hope to make this an inspiring building for both OPS and the community at large. So thank you very much.
So I'll just do closing remarks. So I'd like to mention that a project of this scale takes a considerable amount of effort and time and dedication to deliver. First of all, I'd like to thank the board and the executive for the support that we received for this project. And I'd also like to recognize the excellent work and collaboration that's been going on with our project team, our city partners, and many of the OPS members who've actually contributed a lot of time and effort to the design of the facility. I'd also like to thank my facilities team who carry a huge responsibility for delivering the project on behalf of the OPS. They're actually keeping this project on track. They're keeping it within the budget and within the scope. And those are never easy things to do in any environment, but they're doing a great job. This is the biggest facility project undertaken by the OPS in many, many years. Certainly it is the biggest one we've undertaken, and it is a specific big deliverable for us on the facility strategic plan. It doesn't get bigger than this. This is the big kahuna. The new facility is going to have a major impact on our service delivery, and it's going to provide a modern and flexible facility for the OPS as we change and grow. The next milestone will be the award of the construction contract, which we'll be coming back to you for in April of 2020. And we hope that we'll see you all tomorrow at the public open house. And if I may be so bold as to answer the first question before we open it up to questions, I could take Member Nerman's question. It's fine? Okay. So it was regarding the partnership opportunities with the city, I believe. What we can let you know is that we have a very close working relationship with the city, with their real estate office. They are strategic partners with us. They've contributed on many of the items that we do. They are our real estate partners in general. We regularly engage with them on partnership opportunities, both from their side and from our side, and we've had lots of success with that in the past. We also have an ad hoc committee that meets about partnership opportunities from time to time, depending on what's happening in the different services. There were no opportunities identified for the first phase. Well, actually, it's the first and second phase, but now it's all in one. There were no identified opportunities for that. However, the city has expressed an interest for possible partnerships as we develop the next 8.5 acres of land. So we'll talk to them about it at that time or as we get closer to development and see what they have in mind.
Thank you all very much for the presentation. It's an exciting project. Are there any questions?
I think you have addressed it.
Yeah. Pardon me? Okay, perfect. Member Smallwood.
Thank you very much for the presentation. One comment, you mentioned the use of native species, which I wholly endorse and think is a wonderful idea. But according to Google, Boston ivy is native to Asia, not Canada. So when you said Boston ivy, I thought, doesn't sound right, and it isn't. So just in case you happen to be out looking for, there are other ivies. The question I had was, and this was answered before, but can you refresh my mind, as I understand, there is no public transit to this site. And I'm just wondering if you can remind us why we built a site where there is no public transit. Thanks.
We were in consultation with the city in regards to public transportation, and we were informed that they don't have any current plans at extending public transportation along Prince of Wales Drive. The site was selected quite a few years ago in 2006, And as we were going through the site approval process, we had established criteria. Public transportation was one of the criteria. It rated really low on the evaluation, but with the other elements that we were considering as part of the criteria, the site was still selected as the best site for OPS to locate the new station.
Well, I guess it's too late in the game now, but I really think going forward, we should always be making sure, because for people who don't have cars who would want to get to that site, it obviously isn't very accessible. So I just make that comment for what it's worth.
Just to follow up on that, it is outside currently the urban transit area, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will always be outside the urban transit area. It is very close to the village of Manotick, which is growing, and the Transit Commission works on a sort of a supply and demand curve. So as there's demand for service, they will put transit service on. And I know that member Meehan, who isn't with us tonight, but is hell-bent that we will get transit service to that site. So I don't think it's a forever thing. I think we will see in the future that we'll manage to find a way to get transit to the site. Okay. Anyone else? Member Valaket?
This is a question for the architect. I would like to know, there's quite a bit of glass on the building. Have you met with Safe Wings Ottawa? Have you looked at, I think it's called fritted glass?
Yes, that's
Because
right.
the height of your building, that's exactly where birds are the most vulnerable. So I'm wondering if you've engaged and spoke with them yet.
We have, and thank you for that question. It's a great question. I know it's a hot topic right now, certainly, and we're advocates of fritted glass. In this case, we're actually covering the majority of the glazing on this building will actually be covered by the metal louvers that we spoke about, and that's, again, they have multiple functions in that they're helping mitigate some of the glare in the building, but they're also providing that bird protection from the glass. We do have the one area that we may consider we are considering fritted glass on is that main staff atrium, which is like primarily the largest glass volume on the building, but almost the remainder of the glass is actually has a layer of louvers in front of it, which will mitigate that.
That's great and good to hear, but I really would recommend that you give them a call.
Will do.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, Member Nerman?
Just one follow-up question on the utilizing this space beyond the police services. You told me you will be discussing this with the city, and that is a part of the plan. Can you strategize it, meaning that you will be taking the public input on that? Because engagement of the public into this is a huge space. So if we can utilize any, maybe a playground or whatever the city has, that will be very beneficial in engaging the public into this project and taking the public feedback. You will be going through that process.
So absolutely, as we get closer to the development of the next phase of the project, we will be engaging first the city to find out what the opportunities are there for partnership, and then there would always be a public portion of that. The same way we did a consultation for this one, a pre-consultation, we would do that prior to designing anything. It's very helpful for us to have that kind of community input.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation. Received? Received. I think that brings us to the end of our public agenda, so I would just entertain a motion to move in camera. Thank you. So carried? Carried.